Welcome to episode 165 of Angela Watson's Truth for Teachers. I'm your host, Angela Watson, and I'm here to speak life, encouragement, and truth into the minds and hearts of educators and get you energized for the week ahead. Today, I'm going to talk about why parenting guilt is on the rise, particularly among educators, and share how teachers are coping. Visit truthforteachers.com to get the transcript or to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you find this episode helpful, I'd love for you to leave a review on iTunes. If you need graduate level credits for license renewal or a pay step increase, look no further than the sponsor of today's episode, which is Teachers Learning Center. TLC's independent, steady, self-paced format allows busy working teachers to earn graduate credits any time of the year, without time restraints, traveling, or tech hassles. TLC has been offering these courses for more than 15 years, and they're a partner with regionally and nationally accredited universities. Go to tlcgraduatecredits.com/Angela. That's tlcgraduatecredits.com/Angela to get your coupon code now. So our topic today is parenting guilt. I'm going to share some info and studies about how this has become an increasingly bigger issue in recent years. And then I'm going to let you hear directly from other educators about how they're managing it. I think this is a particularly pervasive issue in education because you're not just choosing between work and family, like many people are. It can feel like you're choosing between one group of children that you deeply care about, who are your students, and another child or children who are members of your household and whom you also care deeply about. No matter what you do, it feels like you're shortchanging kids, and that's never a great feeling. Now, certainly people of any gender can experience parenting guilt, and we'll get to that, but statistically, women tend to feel it more acutely. I looked at a number of studies on this, and the lowest number I found was 57% of working moms say they feel guilty about not spending enough time with their kids. Some studies showed the amount was as high as 97% of moms. And interestingly, the data didn't change that much with moms who are not employed outside the home. Now, you might wonder, how could that be true? If you're with your kids most of the day, how could you feel guilty about not spending enough time with them? But it seems that everyone worries they're not focused on nurturing their kids. Everyone feels like they should be engaging with their kids more, stimulating them more. And that's a little bit of a red flag for me, that maybe the problem has something more to do with our beliefs about what it means to be a good parent. In my view, the standards have been raised to a nearly impossible level for parents. When I was growing up, all the kids in the neighborhood played outside until the streetlights came on. My mom made sure I did my homework, she fed me dinner, and she had me cleaned off and ready for bed at a decent hour. Now, certainly she did a lot more than that to nurture my development, and my dad was present in our home too. But from the perspective of social pressure, that was the main expectation for mom. Dinner, homework, ready for bed, right? Kids played outside and they were independent. And I feel increasingly now in the dominant culture in the U.S., particularly among middle and upper class families, the way that I was raised would border on neglectful. You can't just let your kids go off and play for hours with no adult supervision. Good parenting requires all hands on deck from every adult in the home who must be constantly stimulating children's language and cognitive development and socio-emotional skills. This requires enrolling children in endless activities and chauffeuring them around so they can be well-rounded adults. Now, that sounds a bit snarky, but I think a lot of the demands on parents are quite legitimate in light of how the world operates and what we know now about how the brain develops. Good parenting now requires monitoring screen usage, for example, and engaging kids in conversation about the types of content and messaging that they're seeing online. I think that could probably feel like nearly a full-time job in itself, right? When kids misbehave, child development experts say that you should no longer just spank them or put them in timeout or issue a punishment, but you should instead help children identify and process their feelings and develop better coping strategies when they feel strong emotions and communicate in healthy, productive ways. That's a lot more work than just spanking them and sending them to their room, right? Our standard now for good parenting is not just meeting kids' need for survival and raising them to have good character, but to also be creative problem solvers and uniquely talented, competitive in a global workforce, and a whole host of other really complex outcomes. Kids today need a much broader, deeper, and more diverse skill set in order to succeed in today's world. I think much more so than what was required in past generations. Preparing kids for that world, at least from my perspective, is a much more demanding job. And when you think of everything else that parents are juggling now, between paying for healthcare costs, to grappling with massive social change, holding on to unemployment in a challenging economy, all kinds of other issues, it's awfully hard to feel like you are staying on top of everything and doing it all well as a parent. So, who's most responsible for carrying that workload? The study that I shared, which reported that 57% of moms feel guilt about not spending enough time with their kids, found that only 19% of dads felt that way. One columnist named Cecile Meyer posited that this is because the standards set by the culture for women are much more demanding. Women are expected to be the primary caregiver, and it's just assumed that they will take on the basic parenting duties with no acknowledgement, whereas men are seen as being really great dads for, quote, helping out. So the bar is just sort of lower for dads. If a dad is doing more than what his father or his grandfather did in the generations when men were mostly hands-off in their parenting, then they're doing great. Cecile sums up the sentiment, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here. If you feel like an average mom, that means you feel like a bad mom. If you are an average dad, you're amazing. I feel like that's an important launching point for this episode because it's that feeling of comparison and outside expectations that I think is at the root of the problem. Parenting guilt is created when we're not living up to the expectations or standards that were created for us and that we've then internalized, or expectations that we've set for ourselves. Culturally, the parenting expectations are higher for women, which is a big part of why mom guilt is more pervasive than dad guilt. But that said, if you're a dad who feels like you're not doing enough and you're falling short as a father, you're not alone either. And you will definitely relate to the advice that you're about to hear. You have the advantage of feeling less social pressure to be continually engaging with and nurturing your children, but you're not immune to that ever-present desire to want to do more for your kids. I think every parent feels that. I also think there's a type of parenting guilt that is unique to educators who may feel like my own children are going to be fine because they have so much, but my students really need me. I have to keep putting them before my own family because my students' families are not doing their jobs. And that's sort of an interesting play here on the parenting guilt, right? Like, I think that's part of the reason why we feel so torn and we feel like when we're focusing on our own children, we're letting our students down. It's a little bit of the savior mentality where we feel responsible for fixing problems that we're not tasked with fixing. Or we're trying to single-handedly compensate for broad social and systemic issues at the expense of our own children. We focus on what other parents should be doing differently, while also feeling that nagging feeling of not having done enough for our own kids. It can become a comparison trap. Like, well, at least I'm not doing what that other person is doing. At least I'm better than her. And that's kind of a harsh truth, but I'm saying it anyway because I think a major part of overcoming guilt of any kind is compassion. Compassion for self and compassion for others. Our students' parents are also struggling with unrealistic expectations. And it's even harder for them if they're in under-resourced communities and communities that are underserved. We get into the trap of saying parents these days aren't doing their job. And meanwhile, they're saying the same things about teachers and criticizing teachers endlessly. So I think more compassion is needed for the difficulty of both parenting and teaching in our current era. Both are tremendously difficult. And when we point fingers to blame each other, we're missing out on the fact that there are much larger changes in society that have upped the ante and have made it more difficult for parents and teachers to thrive in their roles and to support kids the way they need to. I think the key is to make these choices from that place of compassion, both for yourself as a parent and for your students' parents, rather than assuming that you need to compensate for the things that you believe they should be doing but aren't. Leading with compassion rather than judgment is something that I particularly try to be aware of myself, given that I am not a parent. The remainder of this episode is going to be based on the experiences of teachers who are. I asked teachers in the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek Club to share how they have grappled with this issue. So this will be sort of similar to episode 139 of the podcast, which was about how to keep teaching from ruining your marriage. You'll get to hear in teachers' own words about what they've done to try to protect their family time. And what was interesting with this time around when I asked this question about mom guilt and dad guilt is that there was one single common denominator that everyone who responded mentioned. I was expecting their responses to center more on relieving the guilt, as in reframing the way they thought about the time that they spend focusing on their students. What I heard instead was a change in the way they actually taught and parented. In other words, they didn't just change the ways they thought about the expectations on them. They also changed the actions they took and the way they structured their time. I think it'll be more interesting for you if you identify the patterns among their responses yourself. So I'm going to play all 4 audio clips here back to back, where teachers are talking about how to grapple with parenting guilt. And then afterward, I'll share my takeaways about how I connected the dots.
Angela, this is such a good topic. I came back to teaching after a 4-year hiatus with a 1-year-old and a 3-month-old. I'd quit my previous bank job because it required weekly out-of-state travel, and I didn't want to do that with young kids. So I was dealing with a new curriculum, new school, new career, and new mommyhood all at the same time. The first year, I committed to not bringing work home, but it wasn't enough, and I joined the 40-Hour Teacher Workweek Club with the goal of doing better. Your club worked wonders. I do not bring work home. I changed my grading practices so that kids graded most of their own work and then gave me the best to put in the grade book. All tests and quizzes became digital. I also used some of your April priorities worksheets to begin scheduling time with my husband and children each week. It's not over the moon special, but it is time where my full attention is on them. I also had to make time for myself a priority. All of this was easy to do once my workload was down to about 45 hours a week. That's with a special ed caseload of 16 students and having to write IEPs. I did have seasons of longer work hours, usually around grading periods. I used the list-making system and the planner I got in the club to make sure I stayed organized. A lot of it was mental work and making sure what I did was good enough and not striving for perfection. Working through the club materials was the game changer for me. It was really a matter of sitting down and making those priorities plain and then communicating with my spouse when I was going to need to work longer hours. I love my job and can easily just work on stuff for hours on end, but I love my family and needed to really consider how I wanted to live my life.
The tips that have helped me most are to work when it's time to work and to not work when it's not. I don't bring work home unless there's a specific project with boundaries, and I am very clear about that. I've gotten to where I don't do it. I don't sit and think about it. It can take every minute, but that's not fair to my kids. So I work when it's time to work, and I don't work when it's not. And that sounds so simple, but it's been a lot of practice to get to that. I leave work at work unless there's a specific reason not to. Another thing is to just realize how much of it is my own perfectionism, or I don't really have to do it. When it comes right down to it, it'd be great if my feedback was super, super rapid for my students, but on some days I don't care because I'm going to go home to my kid and my students will get me on my next prep. And I just keep that choice really clear in my mind. The priority planning has really helped me take care of each of my different people because I've got a lot of different kids and a lot of different projects. And to feel like I'm not forgetting somebody, that I'm at least hitting the most important things has been really important for me. And then another thing is just the to make the choice and then give myself boundaries. I feel guilty taking my daughter to daycare every day because I've done daycare for other people's children in my past, but this is my first child I've ever done that too. I just make my best choice and I pray, and it's a very thoughtful, long, drawn out, horrifying process. But once I've chosen where she's going to be, I do this thing where we just say, that's what we're doing this year. We don't quit, we're doing, and unless something major happens, we do the same thing and we keep it the same. And I trust that the consistency is what's best for kids anyway. My older kids talk about hard times that were horrible in my mind and I had so much guilt over, and they've become some of their favorite memories, hard things in our life. And I try to trust the process. Kids need love, and I try to make sure that happens every day and keep it simple and make sure I hit the high points. And then don't let myself think about it anymore.
My daughter is a senior in high school. I decided at the beginning of this school year that I was going to spend a lot more time with her and going to her plays, ball games, etc. Thanks to 40-hour teacher work week, I knew how to achieve that. I cut out all of the things that take so much of my valuable time after school. I did not do book orders, book it, big projects, or a decorated themed classroom. I changed grading rubrics for time-consuming grading like writing. I went in early if needed to get work done when no one else was at school. I have still done fun things for my students like parties, dress-up days, and field trips. If anyone has asked about my not staying late or lack of classroom decorations this year, I've just smiled, sighed, and said, my daughter is a senior. I'm never going to get this time back with her. My students have made a lot of gains this year, and I am happy with their progress. I have focused on what will have the most impact on my students and spent time on those activities.
Hi, Angela. My name is Crystal, and I'm a fourth grade teacher in Florida. I have 3 kids, and they are 6, 8, and 10 years old right now. I'm a single mom, and I have them 100% of the time. My first year teaching, it was horrendous. I didn't feel like I spent any time with my kids. My entire life was lesson planning. I didn't feel like I was doing enough for my own kids. So I joined your club, and since then, I've been able to get a lot more done at school. And when I come home, it's really my time to be with my kids. I've used your resources, which has also made it easier for me to not spend as much money on my classroom, which has freed up the budget. And I've made it a point to make every Saturday family fun day. So I really dedicate my Saturdays to my kids. And my Sundays are my spiritual days. So even if we don't make it to church, at least, we take a walk in the park or we do something peaceful on Sundays. Fridays are like my date nights. When I am dating people, I go out on Friday nights. And I don't feel guilty about it because I know that my family fun day is on Saturday. And I know that my spiritual renewal day is on Sunday. So that's been really helpful for making my job more of a 40-hour work week.
There were more great responses from teachers who didn't leave audio messages, but instead gave me written commentary, and I'm going to add their tips to the blog post for this episode. So if you want more practical advice, click the link in your show notes and you can read that. Here's how I connected the dots between these responses. What I heard consistently was to have a clear boundary between work and home. These teachers are either not bringing work home at all, or they're finding other ways to create distinct time for work and distinct time for family. One of the big challenges in this current era is that we are all reachable and interruptible at any time due to our phones. It's very hard to be off, particularly since things may still be happening in the evenings and weekends. Someone might be emailing you, a parent may be leaving you a message, the principal may need to get a hold of you. The lines between work and home are kind of blurry for people in lots of different fields. So figuring out how you want to separate work and home is really key. If you don't decide, other people will decide for you. My encouragement to you is to question the expectations that have been set around what it means to be a good teacher and what it means to be a good parent. Redefine those roles for yourself. What do your students need most from you? What does your family need most from you? Focus on prioritizing the things that make the biggest impact and letting go of the rest. Don't give in to the pressure to do everything, and certainly don't try to do it all at once. If you're at school, be 100% present with your students. If you're at home, be 100% present with your kids. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. I'm telling you it's going to be worth it.